Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 195. I'm Enigmius and today we're continuing with the Discovery build. You see this little thing that I built since the last episode. There's a profile that I put into place. It's just a few blocks wide and it's got this sort of curving thing, goes from the flat section on this main part of the hull all the way up to the structural part that's going over top of the saucer section. That was something that I put into place after the last episode, and after I basically demolished everything that we did in this spot where we're working, also that we put together in the last episode. So we're kind of starting fresh, and we're in a good spot to just kind of pick up here, I think, and show you what's happening. And if you remember the last episode, you know that there was a lot of by the seat of the pants kind of design going on, and that's I think still a valuable way to approach things sometimes. Even knowing now what I didn't know then, I still would have been willing to take that, you know, just kind of throw a few things in place and see how it looks kind of approach to it until I came up with something that I was happy with. So the whole idea and the main difference between what we're going to try and do here now versus what we had in the last episode is that this is going to be a unified sort of design and a unified approach that's taking a look at this whole structure, this whole basically part of the hull that we're going to be adding between the flat section of the main hull and this elevated section in order to make it transition in a way that you look at it and it looks good. It's something that we're happy with. When I left off in the last episode, it didn't look very good at all. It was pretty lumpy, and it didn't have that deliberate kind of look to it that I was going for. So that's what we're going to try and do here. And basically, it's at this point specifically a lot of repeating patterns. The blocks go together in a certain way in order to create these large segments that we're putting into place, and we have to put a certain number of blocks in place and then cycle back and start the pattern over because the blocks can only attach to one another in so many different ways. You eventually reach a point where you can't attach any more blocks unless you go back to the beginning of the pattern and start placing those first blocks again, and it just goes and goes and goes for a very long time. Very long time. Building things on this scale, when it's not even complicated. It's just, like I say, it's the same pattern, the same 2 to 4 blocks repeated basically throughout the entire process. But it's one of those things where it just, the tedium does start to get a little bit much when you're having to repeat over and over and over again, and you're not even really making any decisions at this point. You've already made the decisions and now you're executing. You know, you're putting things in place in order to actualize the decisions that you've already made. So at this point, it's just kind of like, you know, put on some music, do your thing, and just kind of keep in mind that it's still possible to make catastrophic mistakes that are going to take you a lot of time to fix if you just keep building way beyond the point where you should have stopped. Not a problem in this case. In this particular case, I've talked a lot about this specific combination of blocks, the outside corner blocks that allow us to do some interesting 22.5-degree compound angle stuff that we couldn't previously do with the blocks that we had until these ones showed up. The difficulty, of course, is that you end up with this textured sort of pattern, and there's no way to completely smooth it off. We don't have the blocks that would be necessary in order to do that. A lot of times, especially working on smaller things where you have a lot more transitions, you have a lot more changes and things going off in different angles, it gets to be a bit much, I find, with this textured sort of effect. But in this case, because we're talking about such a large area in the grand scheme of things that we're covering with this repeated pattern, I actually don't mind it. It reminds me sort of like an armored effect, like a scale mail kind of thing, or just that overlapping plates sort of effect, which maybe doesn't necessarily fit on a spaceship, but in this case, it's not too bad. Now, you saw me starting to remove some of the blocks, and I removed them all the way up to that central piece that we already put in place. Went over to the other side, did the same thing, and now I'm replacing those blocks with the 22.5 degree compound slope ones, the ones that you can put together and create a smooth sort of face. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I was looking at what I was doing and then thinking about how it was going to line up with that central piece coming down off the top of the saucer section. And I realized that this would be probably better served with this shape that we're putting into place, which happens to be made out of the blocks that go together to create a smooth surface. So I'm not even thinking in terms of avoiding these outside corner blocks for this particular part of the build. I'm just kind of thinking in terms of, how things might fit together and how best to produce the overall look that I'm going for. Now, the whole idea here is I wanted something that looked kind of big, beefy, some things that look like curves. Again, it's a voxel universe. You can only get it so close to an actual curve. But I wanted it to have that sort of look to it. In order to do that, I started with that profile in the front. We saw that briefly at the very beginning of the episode before I started covering it up with blocks. But that was kind of the beginning, and now at this point we're just kind of looking at all of these different sheets, these panels that we're building as they come together and trying to get them to transition from one to the other, and then eventually from the top section of these panels to that central section right to the right of what we're doing here. We get that taken care of, and then I think we'll be in good shape. It'll be one of those situations where we can kind of leave it for a day or two. And I don't expect that I'll be making any massive alterations to it, but I do see the opportunity already for a couple of places where I can make some minor adjustments just to kind of refine it a little bit. And that's sort of my favorite place to have things other than done sometimes. Is in the spot where you feel very confident that you aren't going to have to make any massive adjustments in order to make things look the way you want them to. But you do have that opportunity still to go back and make some adjustments. They don't take a long time. They aren't particularly difficult, but they just kind of, bring the build farther along. It's progress. It's not just change, which is kind of a good thing at this point. Now, one of the ideas that I had in mind that we're just starting to put in place now in terms of how this is going to transition to that central section is we've got this curve coming around from the big bulky section, and then it could either continue curving in until it just transitions directly into that central section, or like you can see I'm starting to do here, it kind of actually curves, it starts to curve very slightly away from that central section around the point where it starts to meet up with it, which again, it's one of those little things I noticed. In this case, I caught it and I was able to implement it in the first pass instead of as an adjustment later on. But it's just that little bit of a refinement that, to me, can often make a very big difference overall in the final appearance of a project. And I think you can hopefully see at this point the way it's coming together. It's still big, it's still bulky, it's still very voxel and not at all perfect. But it's definitely a dramatic improvement over what we left off in the last episode, which is kind of the exciting part, is when you see that sort of progress. Now, you may have saw I kind of floated away from the ship a bit to try and get a look at it. And one of the things that I've been finding is that it's very difficult in space, with or without a jetpack, to maneuver and feel like you're maneuvering in space. And I don't understand why. It's like they want to keep you attached to a specific plane so that you don't, maybe you don't get turned around, you don't get confused. I don't claim to know all the details. I know that there was a key, it's like Shift O or something like that. I've looked it up in the past to make sure I had the right key, and I tried it and it didn't work. But the whole idea is that with ships, when you're flying a ship, sometimes it'll lock you along the horizontal plane. So if you try and rotate or roll, I guess more specifically, the ship, it won't let you until you hit this key, the Shift O or the O, and then it releases that lock so that you can roll your ship. But it doesn't have that same functionality when you're in your spacesuit, so it's a little bit difficult at times to be aligned properly with what you want to do, especially since the last episode I added somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 RCS units to the ship so that I could tilt it down. It was already tilted down a little bit, but I wanted to tilt it down even further so that we could get the sun shining on this part of the ship and it would be better lit for you guys. And now that the ship is tilted and the game wants me to stay on a particular axis, it's a very weird situation. It's just very bizarre. So if it looks like I'm looking at things from a weird angle for no apparent reason, yes, it is a weird angle. No, it's not no apparent reason. It won't let me change so that it looks a little bit more natural. All things considered, I would rather have the navigation be a little bit odd and have things well lit than have everything really, really dark and have a perfect vantage point of nothing because you can't see. All of that pointless chatter just to fill the time till we get to this point here where we're looking at it, that big bulge on the back. It's like the hunchback of the Star Trek universe. Quasimodo, I was thinking of renaming the ship just based on that big sort of bulge kind of thing. Can't keep that. We've put all of this time and effort into it. Specifically for the purpose of getting rid of that by the seat of our pants look. So we're going to change that. But I also wanted to manage the transition right here. This is sort of like the very front. Right now it's basically like a flat 90-degree transition from that top part coming down to this big bulky part. I wanted to kind of close that off and put something in there to make the transition a little bit softer and not so immediately 90 degrees, I guess would be one way of describing it. And here's just kind of messing around with different shapes and things that I could put there and getting a feel for what may or may not work. And this is kind of one of those less is more kinds of things where we could make it complicated, we could try and make it interesting, but realistically speaking, it's just this little thing that you aren't even supposed to notice that you put there so that you don't notice the other part that we don't want you to notice, which is that horrible transition. And now we get to get rid of that big lumpy bit, the last great lump on the back of the USS Discovery, NCC-1031B. And it's nothing particularly complicated. All we're basically doing is reducing some of the height on that particular section, basically lowering it down so that it's a little bit closer to the structural parts that we just put in. And once that's done, we have the opportunity to kind of take a look at things and evaluate it as almost complete in terms of the rough end. Like I say, if we could get this to 90% complete, that would be pretty fantastic, because it is a large ship, and 90% complete on anything at this point is kind of a big deal. So you can see I tried it one way and then I realized I didn't go far enough, so we went a little bit farther back, removing this stuff here, bringing it down a little bit further, and the end result will be something that lines up. Everything transitions nicely. We don't have it look like it's just had a little bit too much radiation poisoning. Who knows? If you've seen the series, you know they could go anywhere with what happens on the ship at any given time. And in this case, I didn't really want to push the limits of what that might be. Why our ship ended up deformed in the back when we could have prevented it if we had just given a little bit of thought to what we were doing. And you can see the whole process. Again, it's repeating the same few blocks to do the transitions on the edge, and then closing off the top part. There was actually a point right here where I was looking at it with those open sections in between the different slats, and I kind of liked the look of it and was thinking about how I might be able to keep that and, you know, still have it look like it was whole, like it was functional, like there was a reason to have those slats there. And ultimately, I decided to just close it up for now. And if I can come up with an excuse to put those back, I might just do that, because there was something about it that I really liked. And I was a little bit reluctant to immediately just close it in without giving it a bit of thought. So here we are. We're basically the back end, one of the last bits that we're going to be focusing on for this episode, bringing everything together, the final stretch. The next episode, we're going to basically pick up exactly where we've left off. I want to spend a little bit of time working on the back end of the ship, where we're going to have the entrance to the shuttle bay. One of the things that I've noticed with the ship in the series is that it has doors that close for the shuttle bay, but you also see it a lot with no doors at all. It's just the scene involves the doors being open. I may end up just doing an open sort of thing with the back end of the ship. You fly your ships in and be done with it, but we'll see. Getting kind of an idea now, whenever we go back a little bit, how this is turning out relative to what we had in the last episode. I'm quite happy with it. So there will be an opportunity for you to see one last time, before this episode is over, sort of how things are looking from a broader perspective. And then the next episode, like I said, we'll pick up where we left off. We're going to start working on the shuttle bay. Once that's done, we're going to have to do the nacelles and the structural elements that hold them and attach them to the rest of the ship. So we're getting there. We've got the saucer section and pretty much most of the main hull done. The nacelles are something that we're going to try and duplicate as close to exactly as we can. So the design work is almost done for this particular ship, and it's just a matter of getting all the blocks in place. So if you want to be notified about the next and future episodes, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information box below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.